I think about that way in terms of bands that I love and then fall out of love. And I'm like, it's not that I don't like the band anymore. It's just the band has nothing to offer me right now.
Yeah.
And so
it's like friendships that you sort of outgrow, I think. Yeah.
And they can always come back. Like the Beatles being that thing you love when you're young. But like right now, currently, I'm like, the Beatles can't offer me anything. I know one day I'll come back to them and like rediscover something. But right now, why would I listen to them?
Welcome to This Broken Mixtape, the podcast that rewinds and presses play on the soundtrack to your life. I'm Jeff Wu.
I'm Justin Lee.
Toronto folk singer Luke Kuplowsky, otherwise known as Luka, conjures the smoky vocals of Bill Callahan and Phil Elverum. Kuplowsky recorded and mixed his third record, What Kind of Animal, in a live session on a cold afternoon in the dead of winter. The album is a collection of songs that explore themes of self-doubt, integrity, companionship, and faith. We sat down with Luke to talk about his favorite winter albums, being drawn to the music of video games like Final Fantasy as a child, and the improvisational nature of his live shows.
You're tuned into This Broken Mixtape. Our special guest this week is Luke Kuplowsky of the folk indie rock project Luka. Welcome to the show, Luke.
Good to be here.
The new album, What Kind of Animal, I learned that it was recorded just over the course of one day, like sort of live, one take. The idea of it being sort of recorded over just one day, it's kind of a, I wouldn't say unusual, but most sort of musicians would take a few days up to a few months to record. What was sort of the thought process behind doing it all in just like live and in a one-day take?
I think it largely came from the recording process of my previous album, Summon Up a Monkey King, which was recorded over the course of like 6 months with lots of overdubs and, weeks between coming back to songs. And I got so bored of that process. I just wanted to have everything done immediately. And I went to the kind of absurd extreme that we mixed it live as well. Mm-hmm. So we never touched the record again after that one day. Mm-hmm. But I think it also came from just being around a circle of collaborators and friends in the city that kind of merged the singer-songwriter world with more kind of experimental and improvisatory worlds. And I think that blend is always so nice. So I wanted to make a record that the ideas were still fresh as they were being recorded. We didn't have time to kind of overthink things and try to make things sound too perfect. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think like listening to the album, it has this very raw feel where sometimes albums are, overthought, overproduced. And this just feels like largely like you're just kind of watching this intimate show happen before you and listening to it.
Mm-hmm. A friend of mine recently was like, I like when you play because it's always growing. The song is always growing or something. And I was like, yeah, that's, I think, kind of what that record was about. Seeing a song kind of grow rather than just kind of be a flower already. The song kind of grows and then it reaches some point where it is quite beautiful and then kind of dissipates again.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels very much like an album that you would play during the winter. I'm wondering, what are some of your favorite sort of soundtracks to like a winter's night?
One of the big ones is Joni Mitchell's Hey Gira. Mm-hmm. And that's a record that has been a kind of a favorite for a while, but last year, I guess it was, at the Holy Oak, which is, are you familiar with that space?
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, so
it's gone now, right?
It's gone, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that is like a space that's largely responsible for everything involved with Luka and my songwriting and the collaborators I played with. Mm-hmm. And during that time, I would do tribute nights. And one of the tribute nights that we organized was Joni Mitchell's Hey Gira Back to Front. And I think it was last winter that we did that. And so that last winter, I have a very hard time memorizing music. So I had the job of learning Coyote. Mm-hmm. And so I had to listen to that like hundreds of times to try and just instill that into my brain. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Joni Mitchell's Hey Gira. I always find myself going back to Mary Margaret O'Hara's Miss America at this time of the year. I like that record. What are other good winter ones? I find myself listening to a lot of Nina Simone this time of year. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. My favorite being, Live at Carnegie Hall, which was like one of the first records I bought, vinyl records I bought when I was a teenager.
Let's talk a little bit about that time. What was your sort of entry point into music? Were you listening to music around the house? Was it things that your friends passed along to you?
I've been thinking about this in preparation for this, and I realized that there's kind of like 3 streams in which I was into music as a kid. One that is kind of runs through my whole life is my father's record collection, and he has like about over like 1,500 records and 2,000 CDs. So growing up, to this day, like I'll still discover things through that. But the first category was kind of 60s and 70s pop, so the Beatles, the Kinks, ABBA, that kind of music. We had a little 45 player, and my brother and I would always, our 2 favorite songs were Build Me Up Buttercup and Love Potion No. 9. Mm-hmm. We just always put those on. So that's one category. The next one was video game music, because my brothers and I were very much into like the Final Fantasy series.
Okay.
So yeah, we listened to a lot of video game music through like file sharing, and also found out later on that there was this like one store in the back of Chinatown Center that had import video game CDs that were like ridiculously expensive. But my brothers would like save up their money and buy like Brave Fencer Musashi soundtrack all in MIDI.
Yeah.
not kind of a waste of money, but they would buy that.
But there's something about the quality of MIDI that's like, it's nostalgic for sure, but
they've started putting out video game soundtracks on vinyl now recently.
Like the
Pretty
older
cool.
ones too?
What's that?
Like the older, like Super
the
Nintendo?
older ones.
Oh, that's great.
It's nuts. Like I was watching Digging in the Carts. Have you ever seen that documentary? Yeah, so good. Like I remember watching Space Harrier. I used to play that, and the soundtrack's so good.
Cool.
And there's such a huge music scene that's just, a lot of it just pays homage to all those old soundtracks.
Yeah.
All those old theme songs. Like, I can't remember. I feel like it was for TIFF. Could have been another festival, but I remember going to the TIFF Lightbox, and it was just a bunch of different bands playing like songs from like Mega Man and like Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
It was bizarre, but kind of great.
It's always impressive when you see them play that stuff live.
For sure. What were some of your favorites growing up? I mean, you mentioned Final Fantasy.
Yeah, I think it was like Final Fantasy 6, 4, 6, and 7 that were like the big soundtracks. And Final Fantasy 6 has that whole opera that's like in the middle of the video game. It's like a whole opera in MIDI, where you're like taking part in it. And that like opera, I remember specifically, was like the best thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, so you mentioned 2 streams. So the first,
So the third, which I'll kind of put 2 together, was I think through, I guess, video games and specifically Final Fantasy and also being into Dragon Ball, I was very into Asian culture, and specifically Jackie Chan and ex-Japan. So Jackie Chan I got into through taking martial arts and seeing some of his movies, but at a certain point I found out that he sang, and then became obsessed with all his music, and like went on file sharing sites, went to a Jackie Chan forum, and like searched out all the theme songs. And so like Jackie Chan was like my biggest musical hero for a second.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then ex-Japan, I don't even know how I got into it. And it's something I've never kind of gotten into again, which is like Japanese hair metal. But for some reason, ex-Japan like made such a big impact on me when I was young. And they had this song, what was it, Art of Life, that's just like a 30-minute hair metal odyssey. And that was one of the first times I was like, wow, that's serious music.
Nice.
This like 30-minute hair metal opera.
The only sort of Japanese bands that I could think of that are, I mean, I wouldn't even call them hair metal. They're just sort of metal. But the only 2 that come to mind are like Boris and Mono.
Yeah.
Who are both great.
I think of Boris. Boris has played Toronto a few times,
A few times, yeah.
Yeah.
As well as Mono. So listening to your vocals for the first time, 2 singer-songwriters came to mind, Bill Callahan as well as Phil Elverum of Mount Erie. It feels like sort of a similar texture. What sort of singer-songwriters were sort of influential in you kind of developing your own voice?
I think one of them that kind of crept up on me, but in retrospect was a big influence, was Jesse Winchester, who is an American singer-songwriter who moved to Montreal in the early 70s, where he kind of befriended Robbie Robertson and Todd Rundgren, and they recorded his first couple albums. And my dad grew up in Montreal and was like his biggest fan. And so he had all of his records growing up. And around age maybe like 15, I started going yearly with my family to his concerts at Hughes Room down in Roncesvalles. And how he would play those shows would just be him on a stool, always the same sweater, playing a nylon string guitar. And the way that he played these songs that he'd written, his whole life, he played them so intimately and so familiar, and the kind of pace of the music, like there was no real structure, kind of ebbed and flowed in its own way. And he was just such a sweet, sincere personality that those concerts was like, I feel made such a big impression on the way that I wanted to play towards an audience or write songs that you could kind of grow old with and rediscover as you go. And just that pace though of like playing a nylon string guitar and not really keeping it to a rhythm, but just kind of following the way that the song goes.
Sure. Your dad seems like a huge music fan. Do you think that you would have pursued music if it wasn't for him? Because it seemed like from a very early age, music has always been around. He's always put you on a new artist.
Yeah, for sure. I think, look, my mom and dad aren't musical themselves, but they encouraged us a lot to listen and to play. So for sure, they're a big influence. And it's some things that my dad turned me on to, but then other things were just, with that collection, my brothers and I would always just like take out every record at a certain age when we started really getting into music. And it's so funny to see, at age 15, you take out certain records and be like, this is trash. And like, we'd be so judgmental, like 10 seconds into a record. And then like 4 years later, you're like, this is one of the best records I've ever heard.
Tell us about some of those records. What were ones that you came around on?
Well, one of the big ones, which is like such a huge influence for me, is Jonathan Richman. And my dad has two of his records, This Kind of Music and Jonathan Richman and the Modern Lovers. And he didn't really ever play those records as far as I can remember, but they were there. And in our like, record by record hunt, we'd take it out and we look at the cover like, that looks pretty good. Put it on, and within like 10 seconds, I was like, this is a joke. This is not, this is like his voice is out of tune. It sounds sloppy. I don't get it. And then I just, for some reason, it was within like a 3-year span that I kept going back to the record being like, well, maybe there's something there. And then I'd hear maybe like an interview with the Talking Heads mention the Modern Lovers, or Lou Reed mention the Modern Lovers. And I was like, okay, I like them. And they like Jonathan Richman. Like, what's up? And finally, there was this one day, and it was the two songs, This Kind of Music and Summer Feeling, which are the first two songs on This Kind of Music. And my mind just like kind of, it was blown. I was like, this is incredible. This is so casual. It's so romantic. It's not afraid to be funny, but then like very serious. I like that contrast.
I think there's something to be said about how sometimes you just need to be at the right time in your life to really appreciate something art-wise. Music is certainly a huge thing because there are certain bands that I tried to get into in high school, and for whatever reason, I probably just wasn't cultured enough to really get it. And then later on in my university years, got into it. And
sometimes it's not even like, I feel about being cultured, it's just, it has nothing for you at this time in your life. Like, I think about that way in terms of bands that I love and then fall out of love, and I'm like, it's not that I don't like the band anymore. It's just the band has nothing to offer me right now.
Yeah.
And so
it's like friendships that you sort of outgrow, I think. Yeah.
And they can always come back. Like the Beatles being that thing you love when you're young, but like right now, currently, I'm like, the Beatles can't offer me anything. I know one day I'll come back to them and like rediscover something, but right now, why would I listen to them?
And I like, much like a lot of people, I kind of felt like that this week after hearing the news of Dolores O'Riordan passing away. I think that I was a huge Cranberries fan in high school, but haven't really, to be honest, haven't listened to Cranberries since university. And of course, like, there's one or two things you could do as like a former fan when you hear of someone's passing. You could either sort of quote unquote pay tribute to them by listening to their music, or just be like, I remember being a fan. And I decided to listen to their first 3 records, and they're still like, they've, some of the songs might feel like a little outdated, but for the most part, the songwriting is there. And I understand why like she made such a huge impact on people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This is going to sound like sort of this kind of a campy like question that you would ask on like an old like 60s dating show. But the name of the record is called What Kind of Animal? If I were to put that back onto you, what kind of animal would you be? And why?
I think it's likely a cat.
A cat, okay.
Mm-hmm. I think my first record is called Calling All Cats Black. The second record is Monkey King, but there's a cat staring at me in the face.
Mm-hmm.
Cats are always popping up in my songs. I don't know if I am a cat, but that's what I want to be.
Mm-hmm. Aspiring to be a cat.
Yeah, and I think it's just that laid back, very cool, aloof quality to the cat. That
Misunderstood? Perhaps?
Yeah, maybe misunderstood, but he doesn't really care, the cat.
No, the cat's just doing its thing.
Clearly doesn't care.
I own a cat.
Yeah.
That's how he was.
It took me a while to warm up to cats because I have so many friends who have cats, and you know, like I have these interactions, and at first I'm like, I'm always going to be a dog person, but you know, there's some cats out there that I really love. Like my friend Claire's cat Toby is probably the coolest cat I've ever met in my life. He's kind of like a sort of hybrid of a dog and a cat. Like he does his own thing, but he's not a complete asshole. He's actually quite loving. So yeah, I know you studied in university. You studied the use of animals in film. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was specifically my master's paper was about looking a cat in the eyes in film.
Okay. So what kind of things did you explore in that?
It was mainly the ways in which the appearance of cats in certain films and certain filmmakers, where kind of cats disrupt the flow of a film because they're this contingent quality that can kind of adjust your form of attention that may be structured by the film. You know, films are usually trying to focus you to look in specific places, always. And so the cat is this presence that is usually kind of disrupting that flow. And so I was looking at filmmakers who kind of respect that encounter rather than kind of projecting onto the cat or like using them as a puppet character. The cat is just like this thing that goes through the film in its own way.
Yeah.
What were some specific films that you looked at?
A lot of the French filmmaker Chris Marker's works. And then there was a Japanese documentary filmmaker, Kazushiro Soda, who has a film called Peace. And that was a large part of the essay was unpacking that film. And that film's about the documentary filmmaker basically records his his father-in-law, who is taking care of welfare patients and then also taking care of a family of cats. And they don't try to draw any connections between that, but it's just both those subjects in the same film. And so that was kind of the crux of the essay, was unpacking that film.
Okay. So going back to the new record, you talk a lot about family, love, and death. And as a result, it feels like a very deeply personal album. I'm wondering, do you ever listen to your own music just sort of as like a way, like it being similar to somebody who would write in journals and look back on previous journals? Like, is it a thing that you do for like a catharsis kind of exercise?
I don't know if it's for catharsis. I think I just kind of, if I listen to it, I'm like, is it actually any good? I'll go back to it and just be like, could have maybe improved that, or like, but I don't listen to it too much for catharsis in any way. And I find even though the songs come from a very personal place, only when I'm kind of performing them live do I find myself getting back into that. But if I just listen to the music, I don't find myself returning, and it seems almost kind of distant.
Okay, fair enough. Your previous band, Broken Bricks, it was more like sort of a jangly pop, like rock, kind of almost garage rock, which is very different than your stuff with Luka. I'm wondering, and I know that you said in previous interviews that Luka really kind of transpired from this, like a creative outlet from, you know, something that's alternative to this band that you were working on at the time, and, you know, definitely more sort of singer-songwriter folk music. Tell us about this sort of transition, especially like I know you play with the band on stage, but it must be a very different creative process writing as just a solo artist and also just kind of performing these songs with the band, but they are essentially just your songs.
I guess like in my early songwriting, when I was playing with Broken Bricks, I was writing from such a different place. I was very much into kind of like British rock and roll, and jangly pop, as you mentioned. And kind of my idea of the perfect songwriter at the time was Ray Davies of the Kinks. Mm-hmm. But I was like a kid from the suburbs writing about, being on the dole and like leading a common life and like writing all these kind of British like kitchen sig tropes and singing with a British accent. So it was very formative in like learning songcraft, in like learning how to make a song and develop, verses and chorus and hooks. But it was so largely from an imitative mode, where I was just, 1 week writing like the Kinks, 1 week writing like Elvis Costello or David Bowie. And then I think it's just at a certain point, I started getting too exposed to songwriters who just had such a strong sense of personality to them. People like Jonathan Richman, or someone like Nina Simone, or Bill Callahan. And these are songwriters who I feel just like have such an approach to their singing and their style and their attitude that I felt like deeply resonated with my own personality. So I just started kind of adapting my songwriting, and then started to realize like, if I'm going to write about things, I should write about from my own experiences, and rather than like this fantastical 60s British imagination that I had. So yeah, the transition was largely just recognizing a different type of songwriting, and then also looking inward to see what I had to offer. Mm-hmm. And at first it was just like Heartbreak. That's like the first record. And then it kind of grew into much kind of larger ideas. But I think it took maybe, it took me to be shaken up to kind of like start focusing on myself, but then broadening that as I develop my songwriting.
Sure.
And then I guess playing with a band has been really one of the best parts of Luka, is that the band there's a lot of constant collaborators in the project, but a lot of people come and go and are constantly influencing and challenging the live sound of the band. And so much of what makes Luka interesting is that like we hardly ever rehearse. We just kind of show up usually to a show, and I'll like call 3 of my friends, and they'll come and we'll start playing, and it'll be a surprise to me sometimes what they're even going to start playing. Mm-hmm. And so that improvisation and like the challenge of just being on your toes is what I love about playing music, and in some ways recording music. And that's why the latest record was recorded like that.
Mm-hmm. Has that ever backfired in terms of, when you rehearse, it's not that it's completely predictable, but you at least feel prepared. Mm-hmm. But has anything ever happened at a live show where you're just like, other than like, somebody occasionally playing the wrong note or whatever?
Not yet. Yeah. We've been pretty lucky. And of course, like I think we've rehearsed, 3 or 4 times in like in around 4 years. But it's always just to kind of understand the idea of the song rather than like the parts that people have to play in a song. And I've just been pretty fortunate, I think, to find musicians who are not only kind of sensitive to the music, but they kind of understand when they should, put their foot forward and step back. And they're just sensitive to how the music of Luka kind of has this like flow and needs a lot of space in order for the kind of words to be heard, but also, I guess, the dynamic range of the show we play.
Mm-hmm. Are you doing any shows coming up? I know that you mentioned that you played a show in London recently, but in support of this album, are you going to be doing like a full out tour, or is it just?
We did like leading up to the album release, we played about 14 or 15 dates last year, and then right now I'm working on another record, so we just have a few shows planned. One in Ottawa for Megaphono Festival, which is February 9th. And then we have a show on February 22nd at the Danforth Music Hall, opening up for a bunch of hardcore and emo bands for the Stay Warm Fest. Mm. So that's going to be kind of a surreal show where we're going to start with like a 5-piece band with jazz flute, and then everyone's going to like take over with thrashing loud music.
Was that ever a genre that you were into when you were younger?
Which?
Like emo?
No.
Hardcore, any of that
stuff? The closest thing would be X Japan. Okay. Which like, there's, double kick pedal and some theatrics, but not specifically that that certain aesthetic of hardcore emo, which a lot of my friends were into. And so I'm familiar with that scene, but I've never listened to it. But I feel like it's going to be like a fascinating show to just like, to get the crowd into such a place and then to see them like go crazy. And
Totally.
Do you think you're going to stick around and see the
yeah, I
other
think so.
bands?
Yeah, I want to see what's up.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the thing about that type of music is like it feels very much sort of rooted in like the youth. I don't know, like, I mean, Jeff and I are old men, but like for us to like go to a show like that, I don't know. It's like I think the only sort of comparison is like whenever I go to a hip hop show. I mean, again, hip hop's kind of a young genre too. It feels like, especially new hip hop. So it feels whenever you're sort of thrusted into this environment where everyone is clearly like a decade or more younger than you, it's a little bit a little odd, I think.
Mm-hmm. And I'm fairly young, but I kind of just want to sit at every show now. So I find myself in the city, like largely just going to shows at the Burdock or the Transac, and usually shows where there's only like 15 or 20 people, because I just like, I can't deal with crowds, and I can't deal with standing and like, just, yeah, to get too much, I get too freaked out by those kind of big shows.
Were you ever, when you were younger, did you ever go to like shows where it's like moshing or anything that was like super
packed show?
Yeah, just,
like no space.
What did I see? Yeah, I went to when the Specials were like doing their comeback tour.
Yeah.
I went to one of those, and there was like a bunch of moshing at that. And what else did I remember like that Jack White band, the Dead Weather. I went to their like Horseshoe Tavern show and like got like squished against the wall. And like at that age, it's like pretty fun, but like I don't want to do that anymore. Like the only person I'll stand for now is Jonathan Richman whenever he comes, because it's like just going to church.
Yeah. Well, I mean, different artists, but sort of in the same pool. David Byrne's coming up with a tour like this summer. That would be a great show to go to.
Yeah.
Where is it?
David Byrne's playing the Sony Center in Toronto.
Nice.
Yeah.
But I want to go.
I saw him a few years ago with St. Vincent when he did that collaborative record, and he was incredible. He was everything that you wanted him to be. Yeah. Can you recall like one of the first, not necessarily the first show you went to, but the first show that really made an impact where that's what you wanted to do? You wanted to pursue music.
I think it would have to be that Jesse Winchester shows that I was talking about. But it was specifically this kind of like this funny moment that every year we'd go, whenever he'd play this song called Little Glass of Wine, just like all these kind of boomer audience would whenever he would say, oh, I'm playing Little Glass of Wine, everyone would just go, yeah. And it would just be this like, everyone's like so into it, and they're like, they just love, like they've grown old with this song. And I remember like seeing that around the room and being like, oh, I want to write a song like that, where when I play it, people are just like, they feel good. It's like a hug.
Yeah, everyone approves, you know, smiles across the room.
I know you haven't been around, but 3 albums worth of material is quite a lot already. And that's three albums in the span of 4 years?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you definitely have no case of writer's block, it seems. But just what would be that one song that you think could possibly be an equivalent to that in terms of a crowd favorite?
Like at the moment in playing shows, people really respond to "Oh, My Heart Is Full." Sometimes I just don't feel like playing it, and then that's like the one song that people are like, "You should play it," and then I'll play that. And then I don't know, like from the latest record, Quick Reflex, I've been playing that for a couple years, and it just has so much kind of sentimental value to me, and I never get tired of playing it at the moment. So I'm happy when I write those songs that I'm always looking forward to playing. But it's really the test of like, will I still like those songs in 10 or 15 years? Will people still want to hear those songs in 10 or 15 years? So it'll be interesting to see which songs do age well, and you can kind of rediscover, and which songs you kind of lay aside.
Do you ever turn to your parents for feedback? I mean, I think under normal circumstances that seems crazy, but since your parents are huge music fans, I mean...
Yeah, I think mainly their advice is always like, pronunciate your words a little bit better and bring the vocal up in the mix. Which are like, you know what? It's like usually when that advice is given to me, I'm like, oh, come on.
Mm-hmm.
But in every album, I think my vocal is getting like clearer and clearer and brought up in the mix. So I feel like it is probably, despite my begrudging reaction, is probably rubbing off on me.
Sure. I mean, I don't know if you've heard any of our previous episodes, but we definitely love talking about mixtapes on here, or, you know, playlists.
Mm-hmm.
Probably too young to have made a mixtape. But mixed CD or playlist, do you have one that comes to mind and like sort of an accompanying story with it?
The only one that kind of comes to mind, which is like kind of embarrassing.
Oh, the good ones are always embarrassing.
Yeah, I don't even know how
Okay.
embarrassing. It's just like such a weird, it speaks to, I guess, the weird mix of music that you listen to growing up and think belong together. And it was just this one CD that we burned. My brothers and I would take on our road trips for at least like 3 or 4 years. And we named it the Clone High Preservation Society.
Nice.
Which was a nod to Clone High, which was a TV show that we really dug. And so it was any of the songs associated with that show. But then Preservation Society was a nod to the Kinks. So we had the Kinks Village Green Preservation Society and Preservation Act 1 and 2 and Schoolboys in Disgrace. Those are all Kinks albums that we mixed up songs on. Then there was like Newgrounds novelty songs that we then also put on this mix CD. And it was just such a kind of an awful contrast of sounds that for us, we kind of loved it because we're like, oh, I like this song. This is funny. But I'm like, for my parents, like, that's such a bad listen. To be in a car with like, oh, a Kinks song that you recognize, and then like some joke song from the internet, and then like a Clone High song. And like none of those songs in Clone High, I think we liked beyond the fact that they were on this TV show that we thought was funny.
Sure.
But I remember it just stayed in the car for so long until it got like so beaten up. No case, would miraculously always work, and we'd throw it in until one day it's just like...
So you're just like throwing it into the dash like Rever, just putting it on the ground like...
With burnt CDs, there was a certain point where like after we had kind of grown out of it, it would be almost a joke that you'd toss it and just like be like, I hate this now.
Yeah.
And then you'd put it in and it still works somehow. Like CDs you buy, you drop once and it no longer works.
Yeah.
And then the stupid mix CD just lives forever.
Right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you. It was fun.
Cheers. You've been listening to episode 27 of This Broken Mixtape, featuring Toronto folk singer-songwriter Luke Kuplowsky, otherwise known as Luka. If you like what we do, we would really appreciate if you would rate and share our podcast so we can reach more listeners. Also, make sure to check out thisbrokenmixtape.com, where you'll find this episode's Spotify playlist and all of our other past interviews. You can also find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and now YouTube. Come back next week, where we'll be joined by electro soul singer Wafia. Thanks for listening. Until next time.